Island in ferment, setting the stage for revolution. In the 1950s, Cuba was a boiling island, a place where poverty and luxury existed together in a tense balance. The streets of Havana, although full of life and movement, witnessed a deep social inequality. Ordinary people struggled to survive while the elite enjoyed unimaginable luxuries. The Caribbean Sea, a tapestry of turquoise and blue, cradles the island of Cuba. This sea, with its serene beauty and crystal-clear waters, is a silent witness to the coming changes. The waves that caress the shores of Cuba have seen centuries of history, from the arrival of the Spanish colonizers to the days of American intervention. Palm-fringed beaches meet green mountains. This idyllic landscape hides the tension simmering beneath the surface. The Green Mountains are not only a refuge for flora and fauna, but also for the guerrillas who dream of radical change. The palm trees, swaying in the breeze, bear witness to the whispers of revolution that begin to echo throughout the island. Music spills from the bustling cities. On every corner, the rhythms of salsa and Cuban sun fill the air, providing a vibrant backdrop to everyday life. However, this cheerful music contrasts with the growing dissatisfaction of the population. Songs of love and hope mingle with murmurs of discontent and a longing for change. But beneath this vibrant surface, a storm is brewing. The dark clouds of dissatisfaction and injustice gather on the horizon. The coming storm is not just meteorological but also political and social. The winds of change begin to blow and the island prepares to face a profound transformation. It is the 1950s, a period of stark contrasts where modernity and tradition constantly collide. The streets are filled with classic cars and colonial buildings, a blend of old and new. Life in Cuba is a dance between the past and the present, with an eye on an uncertain future. Cuba, though seemingly alluring, is rife with unrest. Social and political tensions are on the verge of boiling over. Protests and demonstrations become increasingly common, with people demanding change. The island, with its natural beauty and rich culture, is also a place of conflict and struggle. Decades of political maneuvering and foreign influence have taken their toll. Cuban leaders have played a dangerous game, trying to balance national interests with the demands of foreign powers. U.S. intervention has left an indelible mark on the island's politics and economy, creating resentment and distrust among the population. The island nation, rich in resources and culture, yearns for true independence. Despite its natural abundance, many Cubans feel that their destiny is controlled by external forces. The wealth of the land is not reflected in the lives of most of its inhabitants, and Cuba's vibrant culture is a source of both pride and resistance. The sugar industry, Cuba's lifeblood, is dominated by foreign interests, particularly American companies. Sugar, once the island's white gold, has become a symbol of exploitation and control. The sugar plantations, vast and productive, are in the hands of corporations that prioritize profit over the well-being of Cuban workers. These companies control vast plantations, reaping profits while many Cubans toil in poverty. Plantation workers, often living in deplorable conditions, struggle to make ends meet. The disparity between the plantation owners and the workers is a microcosm of the inequality that permeates Cuban society as a whole. Social inequality is worsening. The gap between rich and poor widens every day, creating a breeding ground for discontent and rebellion. Promises of prosperity and progress seem unattainable to most Cubans, who watch as a small elite amasses wealth and power. The chasm between the wealthy elite and the struggling masses widens. In the cities, affluent neighborhoods stand in stark contrast to slums where living conditions are precarious. In the countryside, peasants struggle to survive with limited resources, while landowners enjoy a life of luxury. Discontent simmers in the cities, in the countryside, in the hearts of the people. Conversations in cafes and plazas are filled with complaints and hopes for change. Ordinary people, tired of injustice and oppression, begin to look for leaders who can lead them to a better future. This is the Cuba into which Fidel Castro is born, a country in crisis, desperately seeking a savior. Fidel, born into a well-to-do family, witnesses the inequalities and injustices that plague his homeland. From a young age, he displays a passionate interest in politics and social justice. He enters a world on the verge of radical change. Cuban society is at a tipping point, and Fidel Castro finds himself at the center of this whirlwind. With a clear vision and unwavering determination, he prepares to challenge the status quo and lead his people into a new era. The island's history is a turbulent tapestry woven with threads of Spanish colonialism, U.S. intervention, and fleeting moments of independence. Each chapter of Cuban history is marked by struggles and sacrifices, and Fidel Castro is determined to write a new chapter, one of true independence and social justice. Castro, a young man of sharp intellect and burning ambition, will soon become a key player in this unfolding drama. His charisma and ability to inspire others make him a natural leader. As he grows, his vision of a free and just Cuba becomes his life's mission. His actions will irrevocably alter the course of Cuban history. From his early attempts at rebellion to his eventual rise to power, Fidel Castro will leave an indelible mark on the island. His legacy will be complex and controversial, but undeniably significant. The world watches with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Global powers, particularly the United States and the Soviet Union, closely follow the events unfolding in Cuba. Fidel Castro's figure becomes a symbol of resistance and defiance, and his revolution will have repercussions around the world. The Cold War casts a long shadow. In this context of global tension, every move in Cuba is scrutinized. The island becomes an ideological battleground where superpowers vie for influence and control. The United States, fearful of communist expansion, exerts its influence in the region. U.S. foreign policy is marked by a mix of interventionism and containment, and Cuba finds itself at the heart of this strategy. Fidel Castro's actions and his revolutionary movement are seen as a direct threat to U.S. interests. Cuba, geographically close and politically volatile, becomes a pawn in this global chess game. The island, with its strategic location and rich history, is a coveted prize in the struggle for global supremacy. Tensions between the United States and Cuba escalate, and the island's fate hangs in the balance. The stage is set for a revolution, and Fidel Castro, a charismatic lawyer turned guerrilla leader, will seize the moment. With a clear vision and unwavering determination, Fidel and his followers prepare to challenge the established order and fight for a free and just Cuba. The revolution is afoot, and the world waits with bated breath to see how events will unfold. The shadow of Batista, corruption and discontent. In the history of Cuba, few names evoke the shadow of corruption and discontent as much as Fulgencio Batista. His figure, although complex, is a symbol of a tumultuous era that left an indelible mark on the Caribbean island. Fulgencio Batista, a military officer who had previously held power, seized control of Cuba in a coup d'état in 1952. This event not only marked the beginning of his second term, but also the start of a period of instability and discontent that would define Cuba for the next decade. His regime, although initially popular among some, quickly descended into authoritarianism and corruption. Batista promised stability and progress, but instead his government became synonymous with repression and abuse of power. Corruption infiltrated every level of government, from low-ranking officials to the highest offices. Batista, despite his promises of progress and stability, presided over an era marked by brutality and repression. The state security forces, under his command, became tools of terror, used to silence opponents and maintain control through fear. His government aligned itself closely with U.S. commercial interests, further fueling resentment among the Cuban people. American companies controlled much of the Cuban economy, from the sugar industry to casinos and hotels, creating a growing sense of exploitation and inequality. Censorship stifled dissent. Political opponents disappeared, the media was strictly controlled, and any voice that dared to criticize the regime was swiftly silenced. Freedom of expression became a luxury few could afford. The secret police, known as the Bureau for the Repression of Communist Activities, or BRAC, became a symbol of terror. This organization, tasked with eliminating any communist threat, operated with impunity, using tactics of intimidation and violence to maintain order. Fear permeated Cuban society. People lived in constant fear of being denounced by their neighbors or even their own families. Paranoia became an integral part of daily life, and trust in others eroded. Whispers of discontent circulated in hushed tones. Despite the fear, discontent with Batista's regime began to grow. In the shadows, people whispered about the need for change, about the hope for a better future without the oppression and corruption that characterized the current government. Batista's regime, though seemingly strong, was built on fear and oppression. The facade of stability and control concealed a fragile reality where discontent and resistance were always on the verge of erupting. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The tension in Cuban society was palpable, and many knew it was only a matter of time before something or someone lit the fuse of revolution. Meanwhile, Fidel Castro, a young lawyer with growing political ambitions, emerged as a vocal critic of Batista's regime. Castro, with his charisma and determination, began to gain a following among those disillusioned with Batista's rule. He witnessed firsthand the corruption and injustice that permeated Cuban society. As a lawyer, Castro saw how the legal system was manipulated to benefit the powerful and oppress the disadvantaged. These experiences fueled his desire to fight for radical change. Castro's early attempts at political reform through legal means were met with resistance and violence. Despite his efforts to work within the system, Castro realized that peaceful change was impossible under Batista's regime. The violent repression of his initiatives only strengthened his conviction that revolution was necessary. The government, threatened by his growing popularity, cracked down on dissent. Batista and his allies saw Castro as a growing threat and responded with even harsher repression. Arrests, torture, and executions became commonplace tools to try and quell the revolutionary movement. Castro, forced into hiding, began to advocate for armed revolution. Realizing that peaceful struggle was not a viable option, Castro and his followers began to plan an armed insurrection. They took refuge in the mountains and jungles of Cuba, where they could organize and train without the constant threat of the secret police. He gathered a small group of like-minded revolutionaries, including his brother Raúl and the charismatic Argentine doctor, Ernesto Che Guevara. These men, united by their desire to overthrow Batista, formed the nucleus of what would become the most significant revolutionary movement in Cuban history. Together they formed the 26th of July movement, named after the date of their failed attack on the Moncada barracks in 1953. This movement not only symbolized their commitment to the revolution but also their willingness to sacrifice everything for the cause. This audacious, though ultimately unsuccessful assault catapulted Castro and his comrades into the national spotlight. Although the attack failed to achieve its immediate objective, it demonstrated the revolutionaries' determination and courage, earning them the respect and admiration of many Cubans. It marked the beginning of their armed struggle against Batista. This was just the start of a long and arduous battle that would eventually change the course of Cuban history. The struggle of Castro and his followers would inspire generations of Cubans to fight for justice and freedom, leaving a legacy that endures to this day. The dream of a young revolutionary, Castro's early life and ideals. Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz, known worldwide as Fidel Castro, was born on August 13, 1926, in the small town of Biran, in the province of Oriente, Cuba. From his early years, Castro's life was marked by a series of experiences and contradictions that would shape his character and his revolutionary ideals. Born in 1926 in the rural province of Oriente, Fidel Castro was a child of both privilege and contradiction. The province of Oriente, with its lush vegetation and rural landscapes, was a place of contrasts. On the one hand, natural beauty and agricultural wealth. On the other, poverty and inequality that affected most of its inhabitants. In this environment, Fidel began to develop a social conscience that would accompany him throughout his life. His father, Angel Castro, a Spanish immigrant, owned a successful sugar plantation. The Castro family's sugar plantation was not only a source of wealth, but also a microcosm of Cuban society at the time. The workers, mostly poor peasants, lived in precarious conditions, while the Castro family enjoyed a life of relative comfort. This duality did not go unnoticed by young Fidel, who from an early age began to question the injustices he saw around him. This upbringing exposed young Fidel to both the wealth disparity of Cuban society and the plight of the impoverished workers who toiled on his father's land. The wealth disparity in Cuba was evident in every aspect of daily life. While a small elite enjoyed luxuries and privileges, the majority of the population struggled to survive. Fidel, observing these inequalities, began to develop a sense of social justice that would lead him to question the established system. These early experiences would leave an indelible mark on Castro's worldview, shaping his revolutionary ideals. From a young age, Fidel showed an inclination for reading and studying. He would spend hours devouring books on history, politics, and philosophy, seeking answers to the questions that tormented him. These readings, along with his personal experiences, began to shape his vision of the world and his revolutionary ideals. Excelling academically and athletically, Castro attended prestigious Jesuit schools, where he developed a sharp intellect and a passion for history and politics. The Jesuit schools, known for their academic rigor and discipline, provided Fidel with a high-quality education. Here, he not only excelled in his studies but also in sports, particularly baseball. However, it was his passion for history and politics that truly defined him during these formative years. He devoured the works of Marx, Lenin, and Marty, immersing himself in revolutionary theory and anti-imperialist thought. The ideas of Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, and José Martí resonated deeply with Fidel. Marx and Lenin provided him with a theoretical understanding of capitalism and imperialism, while Marty, the Cuban national hero, offered him a vision of a free and independent Cuba. These influences combined to form the bedrock of his revolutionary thinking. His studies at the University of Havana, a hotbed of political activism, further fueled his growing sense of social justice and disdain for corruption and oppression. The University of Havana, with its vibrant political atmosphere, was the perfect place for Fidel to develop his ideas and engage in activism. Here, he joined student groups and participated in protests against the government, denouncing the corruption and oppression he saw around him. Castro's early forays into politics revealed his charisma and ability to mobilize people. From the outset, Fidel displayed a natural talent for oratory and organization. His passionate speeches and ability to connect with people made him a prominent figure in the student movement. As his reputation grew, so too did his determination to fight for real change in Cuba. He became involved in student protests, denouncing government corruption and advocating for social reforms. The student protests Fidel participated in were not just a way to express discontent, but also an opportunity to advocate for concrete changes. He demanded social reforms that would improve the living conditions of Cubans and denounced the corruption that permeated the government. His fiery speeches, delivered with unwavering conviction, resonated with his peers, many of whom were disillusioned with the status quo. Fidel's speeches, filled with passion and conviction, inspired many of his peers to join the cause. His ability to articulate the frustrations and hopes of the people made him a natural leader and a central figure in the movement for change. Castro's early activism, though initially focused on social justice and political reform, hinted at the revolutionary fervor that would soon ignite a nation. As his activism grew, so too did his understanding of the need for more radical change. Fidel began to see revolution not just as a possibility, but as a necessity to achieve true social justice in Cuba. The young Castro, however, was not without his contradictions. Despite his commitment to social justice, Fidel was also aware of his own privilege. These internal contradictions led him to reflect deeply on his role in the struggle for change and to constantly question his own motivations and actions. While he championed the rights of the poor and marginalized, he was also a product of privilege, accustomed to a certain level of comfort and status. Fidel's life, marked by privilege and comfort, stood in stark contrast to the living conditions of those he fought for. This duality led him to constantly question his own role in the struggle and to strive to be a leader who truly represented the interests of the people. His early political leanings, though leftist, were not yet fully formed. As Fidel delved deeper into the world of politics, his ideas and beliefs continued to evolve. Although he already displayed a leftward tilt, he was still in the process of defining his vision and strategy for achieving change in Cuba. It was the brutal reality of Batista's dictatorship, the crushing poverty that prevailed, and the silencing of dissent that would push Castro towards a more radical path, one that embraced armed revolution as the only means to achieve the true liberation of his people. Fulgencio Batista's dictatorship, with its brutal repression and corruption, was the catalyst that led Fidel to embrace a more radical stance. The poverty and oppression he witnessed convinced him that armed revolution was the only way to liberate Cuba and achieve the social justice he so desperately craved. The guerrillas descend, the spark of revolution ignites in the Sierra Maestra. These mountains, with their rugged peaks and deep valleys, became the stage for an epic struggle that would change the course of Cuban history. The Sierra Maestra, with its dense vegetation and rugged terrain, offered a natural refuge for those seeking to challenge the status quo. In December 1956, following a period of exile in Mexico, Fidel Castro and a small group of revolutionaries, including Che Guevara, Raúl Castro, and Camilo Cienfuegos, landed on the southeastern coast of Cuba. This group, though small in number, was armed with fierce determination and a clear vision of a future free from Batista's oppression. Their arrival aboard the overcrowded yacht Granma was fraught with peril. The journey itself was an odyssey, with the overloaded yacht battling against challenging sea conditions. However, the hope and conviction of these men and women kept them steadfast in their mission. Attacked by Batista's forces, most of the expeditionary force was killed or captured. The ambush was brutal and swift, leaving the survivors scattered and disoriented. But amidst the chaos, a spark of resistance emerged that could not be extinguished. Only a handful, including the Castro brothers and Guevara, managed to escape to the rugged Sierra Maestra Mountains. This small group, though depleted, was determined to continue the fight. The mountains, with their treacherous terrain, offered both a refuge and a constant challenge. The Sierra Maestra, a formidable natural barrier, became the revolutionaries' sanctuary and their training ground. Here, away from the immediate reach of Batista's forces, they began to regroup and plan their next moves. The mountains not only offered them protection but also a strategic advantage. Living in harsh conditions, constantly on the move to evade Batista's army, they forged an unbreakable bond of camaraderie and shared purpose. The cold nights and hot days in the Sierra Maestra tested their endurance but also strengthened their resolve. Every day was a struggle for survival but also an opportunity to fortify their cause. They began to build support among the local peasant population, offering education, medical attention, and, most importantly, hope for a better future. The peasants, who had suffered under Batista's regime, found in the guerrillas not only allies but also leaders who shared their vision of justice and equality. News of the guerrillas' exploits spread throughout the island, carried by clandestine radio broadcasts and whispered conversations. These broadcasts, though rudimentary, played a crucial role in keeping the flame of revolution alive. Every message transmitted was a call to action, an invitation to join the cause. Castro, a master of propaganda, used these channels to denounce Batista's regime and rally support for the revolution. His speeches, filled with passion and conviction, resonated in the hearts of the Cuban people. Every word was a blow against tyranny, a promise of a brighter future. He presented himself as a champion of the people, a liberator fighting for social justice and national sovereignty. His image, carefully cultivated, became a symbol of hope and resistance. Cubans, weary of oppression, found in Castro a leader willing to fight for their rights. His message, amplified by the growing discontent with Batista, resonated with Cubans from all walks of life. From the peasants in the countryside to the intellectuals in the cities, people began to see in the revolution an opportunity for real and lasting change. The revolution, initially a small-scale insurgency, began to gain momentum. Every victory, no matter how small, fueled the hope and determination of the revolutionaries. The ranks of the guerrillas began to swell, and with each new recruit the cause grew stronger. Students, intellectuals, disillusioned members of the middle class, and even some disgruntled elements within Batista's own army flocked to join Castro's ranks. The diversity of the recruits reflected the breadth of discontent with Batista's regime. Each new member brought with them a story of oppression and a burning desire for change. Inspired by the guerrillas' courage and fueled by a shared desire for change, they took up arms against a regime they considered corrupt and oppressive. The weapons, though scarce, became symbols of resistance. Every bullet fired was a cry for freedom. Every battle won an assertion of their right to self-determination. The stage was set for a final confrontation, a showdown that would determine the fate of Cuba and etch Fidel Castro's name in the annals of history. The tension mounted with each passing day as both sides prepared for the inevitable clash. The revolution, which had begun as a dream, was about to become a tangible reality. The spark that ignited in the Sierra Maestra was about to become a wildfire that would change the course of Cuban history forever.